The old mahogany table still dominated the living room, a stubborn relic I'd refused to surrender when the marriage dissolved. Its polished surface caught the gray afternoon light filtering through rain-streaked windows as my phone buzzed against the wood. The vibration was sharp in the otherwise still house. I glanced at the screen and felt my breath hitch for a second.
David.
Mark's David. The boy who'd been his shadow since kindergarten. The quiet best man at our wedding. The steady presence who had hovered at the edges of our louder, more chaotic years. Why would he be calling me now? We hadn't spoken properly since the divorce papers were signed 6 months earlier. There had been one stiff nod across the produce aisle at the grocery store, an awkward sidestep of shopping carts. Nothing more. Mark and I had managed a civil split. Assets divided, memories boxed up, but friendship between us had evaporated. Direct contact with his oldest friend felt almost illicit. I let the phone ring a few more times, the sound too loud in the quiet of a house built for two. Outside, rain hammered the garden I'd been half-heartedly trying to reclaim. The weather matched the mood, gray, reflective, slightly melancholy. Maybe something had happened to Mark. Or maybe it was something mundane. Mail delivered to the wrong address. I finally answered, aiming for a steady voice. Hello, David. A short pause, the soft sound of him breathing on the other end.
Sarah. Hi.
It's David. His voice landed deeper than I remembered, or perhaps simply free of Mark's usual interruptions. There was hesitation in it. Is this an okay time?
Sure.
It's fine. Everything all right? Is Mark okay? The question felt obligatory, the bridge between our shared history and this strange present. Yeah, Mark's fine as far as I know, he said quickly. I wasn't calling about him. I was calling to see how you're doing. That caught me off guard. David, the observer, the quiet one, checking on me. Mark hadn't done that. Our remaining conversations had been pure logistics.
Oh.
I'm doing okay. Getting settled. The words felt thin. Okay was a polite fiction for the emotional reconstruction happening at 52. That's good, he said, though his tone suggested he heard the gap between the words and the truth. He'd watched us for years. He'd seen the fractures long before the final break. Listen, Sarah, this might sound out of the blue, and feel free to say no. No pressure at all. But I was wondering if you might be free for coffee sometime. Just to talk properly. My mind spun. Coffee with David? What would we even discuss? The weather? The version of the past that no longer felt golden? The simple fact that he was still Mark's closest friend? It felt complicated. Yet another part of me, the part that had been drifting through too many silent evenings in a house full of echoes, was curious. Lonely even. David had always been the listener while Mark held court. What had those quiet eyes noticed? Coffee, I echoed, stalling. Rain drummed steadily on the roof. I don't know, David. Given you know. I know, he said gently. It might seem weird. If you're not comfortable, I completely understand. But you were a big part of my life too for a long time. It feels strange just cutting everything off. He was right. He'd been at the barbecues, the holidays, the kids' graduations before they left home. He hadn't been only Mark's friend. He'd been woven into the fabric of our shared existence. That quiet presence had been a constant, and maybe Mark's volume had simply drowned it out. Where did you have in mind? I heard myself ask. There's a little place called the Daily Grind on Maple Street. Usually quiet in the afternoons. We could just talk. No agenda. Maple Street. Neutral ground. Manageable. What was the real risk in a single cup of coffee and a conversation? Maybe some form of closure. Or, unexpectedly, the beginning of something simpler. Ordinary human contact. The idea of romance hadn't even flickered. This was about connection, something I hadn't realized how badly I missed until I heard the unexpected kindness in his voice. Okay, David, I said. The decision settled more easily than I expected. Coffee sounds nice. The bell above the door of the Daily Grind gave a bright little jingle when I pushed it open, shaking rain from my umbrella. Inside, the air was warm and thick with the smell of roasted beans and pastries. The cafe was as quiet as promised. A couple of students bent over laptops in one corner, an older woman reading a newspaper by the window. I spotted David almost at once, at a small table toward the back, hands wrapped around a steaming mug. He looked different somehow, less like an extension of Mark, more like himself. A simple gray sweater, dark hair still damp from the rain, a few more silver threads at the temples than I remembered. He looked up as I approached and offered a hesitant smile. It wasn't Mark's wide, slightly forced grin. It was smaller, quieter, and it reached his eyes.
Sarah.
Hi. He stood. The gesture felt both formal and considerate. Thanks for coming. I wasn't sure you would. You piqued my curiosity, I admitted, sliding into the chair across from him. And I could use a decent cup of coffee on a day like this. He signaled the barista. A few minutes later, a latte sat in front of me, warmth seeping into my fingers. We sat in a tentative silence broken only by the espresso machine and low conversation from the counter. It wasn't comfortable, exactly, but it wasn't unbearable either. So, David said at last, tracing the rim of his mug, "How are you really doing, Sarah?" He looked straight at me. No judgment, just steady attention. The usual polished answers suddenly felt insufficient. It's been an adjustment, I said, eyes on my cup. The quiet takes getting used to after 20 years of noise. I didn't name Mark. We both knew. I can imagine, he answered softly. Mark fills a room. Always has. There was no edge in the observation, just fact.
He does.
And when that presence is gone, the silence is loud. I hadn't planned to be so direct, but something in David's calm made honesty easier. He wasn't trying to fix anything or hand out advice. He was simply listening. I worried about that, he admitted. About how you'd handle the quiet. You always seemed centered in the middle of the chaos. Centered. I almost laughed. I'd spent most of those years feeling like I was treading water while Mark generated the waves. That's kind of you to say, but centered isn't the word I'd choose. Perpetually bracing might be closer. He gave a low, warm chuckle. Maybe, but you held things together. I always admired that. Admiration from David. The feeling was strange and not entirely unwelcome. We talked for a while longer, circling the practical aftermath rather than the divorce itself. He asked about my tentative plans, the gardening I was attempting, the art class I was considering, the awkwardness of showing up alone at social events. I found myself answering more honestly than I'd expected. He listened, asked quiet questions, offered small pieces of his own life. The satisfaction of designing balanced spaces as an architect, the particular pleasure of creating rooms where people could simply exist without pressure. The conversation felt nothing like the ones that had taken place when Mark was present. Those had often been performances or negotiations. This was an exchange, grounded in shared history, but rooted in the present. There was no tension of sides to take, no defensiveness. The only undercurrent was the simple awareness that we were Mark's former wife and Mark's oldest friend, sitting across a small table and finding an unexpected ease. As the rain outside softened, David described a project he was working on, a small community library. His face changed when he talked about natural light and the importance of spaces that felt calm. I realized I felt calm right there, talking to him. That was the most surprising part of the afternoon. The talk drifted into lighter territory. Books, old movies, the small absurdities of local politics. We discovered a shared fondness for classic jazz, something Mark had always dismissed. David mentioned a documentary about Ella Fitzgerald. I found myself describing the worn vinyl of Ella Fitzgerald Sings the Cole Porter songbook that my father used to play on Sunday mornings, a memory I hadn't touched in years. David listened with his head slightly tilted, open and receptive. My dad was the same with Louis Armstrong, he said. That trumpet could fill the whole house. Drove my mother crazy, but I loved it. We smiled at the shared nostalgia, a small bridge that had nothing to do with Mark. In those moments, the connection deepened, not through rehashing the past, but through discovering common ground I had never noticed while David stood in someone else's shadow. When the barista brought refills, David automatically nudged the sugar dispenser closer to me. 2 sugars. The exact way I had always taken it.
Such a small thing.
Mark, after 2 decades, had rarely remembered without being told. David, the quiet observer, had simply noticed and retained it. "You remembered," I said, almost to myself. He gave a slight shrug, a faint flush rising along his neck. "Something stick." We stayed longer than either of us had probably intended. He asked about the kids with genuine interest, my daughter navigating a competitive job market, my son teaching English overseas. He shared a story about his niece starting college and the mixture of pride and worry that came with it. The conversation felt ordinary, like talking to an old friend, except he hadn't been one in that way. Or perhaps he had, and I had simply never categorized him correctly. The tension I felt now wasn't about impropriety. It was about the unexpectedness of being truly seen by someone I had relegated to the background for so long. It forced me to question how much I had missed while caught in the whirlwind of Mark's personality. "You know, Sarah," David said after a while, his tone more careful, "I always felt bad." I looked up.
About what?
He hesitated. About how things were sometimes. With Mark. He didn't need to elaborate. He had been there. He had watched the impatience, the casual dismissals, the way one person's needs so often took center stage. He had seen my quiet accommodations. "You don't need to feel bad," I said. "It wasn't your marriage." "I know. But friendship sometimes makes you feel like you should have said something. And I rarely did. It felt like crossing a line." "It was complicated," I agreed. "You were in a difficult position." "Maybe. I just wanted you to know, I saw you. I saw how strong you were, even when it seemed like no one else did." The words arrived gently and still carried weight. Someone had noticed. Someone had understood, even in silence. There was no pity in his voice, only respect. A wave of something close to relief moved through me. Tears pressed at the edges of my vision. I blinked them back and focused on the foam in my cup. "Thank you, David," I said quietly. "That means a lot." The air between us held a quiet understanding. Nothing romantic. Nothing scandalous. Simply human. A connection shaped by the past but not imprisoned by it, built on observation, mutual regard, and the unexpected discovery that the people you overlook sometimes see you most clearly. Eventually the silence became comfortable rather than awkward. The afternoon light had faded. Street lamps glowed through the rain-streaked window. The cafe was emptying. "Well," I said, reaching for my bag. "Thank you for the coffee. And for the conversation. It was surprisingly nice." "It was," he agreed, that same gentle smile returning. "I'm glad we did this." He walked me to the door and held it while I opened my umbrella. The rain had stopped. The air smelled clean. "Listen," he said on the sidewalk. "No pressure. But if you ever wanted to do this again, just talk. I'd like that." Old instincts urged caution. Years of navigating Mark's possessiveness had taught me to guard social boundaries carefully. Yet the honesty and respect of the past couple of hours pushed back against that reflex. This wasn't about Mark. It wasn't about divided loyalties. It felt separate, something new and grounded in simple regard. It felt like friendship, different in shape from any I'd known before, but friendship nonetheless. "I'd like that too," I said. He nodded, looking relieved. "Take care getting home." "You too." I walked down Maple Street. The damp pavement reflected the streetlights like scattered points of light. My steps felt lighter than they had in months. Nothing dramatic had occurred. No explosive confessions. No forbidden proposals. The surprise wasn't an event. It was an internal shift, the discovery of being seen, truly seen, by the person I had least expected. David hadn't tried to repair me or pull me into any drama about Mark. He had offered time, attention, and respect. He had validated my experience without needing to condemn his friend, acknowledging the complexity of everything. That conversation became a quiet turning point, not toward romance. That wasn't on the table for either of us, and it wasn't what I needed, but toward a clearer understanding of my own life. I began to see that the years with Mark were not the total of who I was. Connections could form in unexpected places. People could surprise you. Quiet observation and steady kindness often carried more weight than louder declarations. Looking back at the marriage, I felt less bitterness and more clarity about the patterns, about my own part in them, about Mark's limitations. Looking forward, the loneliness that had clung to me felt less heavy. The future no longer appeared as an empty expanse, but as open ground waiting to be walked. We met for coffee again from time to time. Sometimes we talked about books or music. Sometimes about the practical and emotional work of life after divorce. Sometimes about nothing more substantial than the weather. It stayed simple, uncomplicated, rooted in that first surprising afternoon. It didn't replace what had been lost. It simply affirmed that new connections, built on honesty and mutual respect, were still possible. It was a reminder that after the noise fades, meaning and warmth can still be found in quiet conversations, in being genuinely heard, and in recognizing yourself reflected kindly in someone else's eyes. And that, I have come to believe, is worth holding on to.